The community hall in Loomis, Pennsylvania, thrummed with the weight of a fading legacy, its cedar beams draped with quilts that whispered of a town clinging to its textile past. Founders Day was alive, a rare burst of warmth in this Rust Belt town, where potlucks and speeches masked the cracks in our industrial heart. I stood at the edge of the crowd, Eleanor Harper, 35, the woman who balanced the books for Harper Textiles, my family's century-old mill. My body still bore the scars of a car accident, my weeks in the ICU a blur of pain and beeping monitors, but I was here, determined to reclaim my place. My father stood at the podium, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the worn wooden stage, his voice booming with practiced charm as he spoke of our family's role in Loomis. His eyes found my sister Clara, 5 years my junior, her silk dress catching the light like a beacon. "Clara is the future of Harper Textiles," he declared, his words sharp enough to draw blood. "She's better than you could ever hope to be, Eleanor." The crowd's gasps were a collective flinch, their eyes darting to me, the discarded daughter, trembling in the shadows. He didn't even glance my way, his dismissal as cold as the steel machines I'd kept running for years. My mother, her smile tight as a seam, clapped beside him, her purse clutched close. I caught a glimpse of a yellowed envelope inside, its edges frayed, a detail that burned into my mind like a stray spark. The hall's murmur swelled, a moment so raw it begged to be shared, whispered from neighbor to neighbor. Why would he say that in front of everyone? What had I done to deserve this? The sting wasn't just in his words, it was in the weight of what they hid. I'd spent my life in the mill's shadow, my hands smudged with ink from ledgers while Clara sketched dreams that never materialized. I'd given up college so she could chase art school, her tuition paid with my future. Yet here I was, publicly cast aside, my sacrifice erased in a single sentence. My mother's applause felt like a betrayal of its own, her eyes avoiding mine as if I were a stain on the family's perfect quilt. I stepped closer to the crowd, my legs unsteady but my gaze sharp, catching the way Clara's smile faltered for a split second, a flicker of something, guilt, triumph, or both. The envelope in my mother's purse gnawed at me, a clue I couldn't ignore. Later, I'd learn it held a letter from my father to Clara, dated the day I crashed on Route 19, promising her the mill's deed while I fought for my life. But in that moment, as the crowd's whispers grew, I felt the first stirrings of something colder than pain, resolve. I touched the brass locket around my neck, a gift I'd given my father years ago, engraved with, "For the heart of Harper Textiles." He'd promised to wear it always, but I'd found it discarded in an attic box, tangled in Clara's old sketches, next to a faded photo of him with a woman I didn't recognize, her face half hidden. Was that photo a clue to their betrayal? My fingers tightened on the locket, its weight grounding me. I wasn't just the daughter they'd dismissed, I was the one who'd kept their legacy alive. The hall's energy shifted as my father continued, praising Clara's vision for the mill, her art gallery in Philadelphia a supposed triumph. The crowd nodded, caught in the spell of his charisma, but I saw the cracks, the way my mother's hands gripped her purse, the way Clara's eyes darted to her, seeking approval. I stepped forward, my voice low but steady, asking, "What about the mill's books, father? The ones I've balanced for years?" The room stilled, his smile tightening. "Eleanor, this isn't your moment," he said, his tone a velvet blade. But it was a moment, one that would spread through Loomis like wildfire, a question that hung in the air: why was I being erased? The crowd's eyes lingered on me, some with pity, others with curiosity, their murmurs a spark that could ignite. I caught my mother's glance, her face pale as she clutched that envelope tighter. Then came the first twist. A woman in the crowd, Mrs. Callahan, a neighbor who'd known us for decades, leaned toward her friend and whispered, "Diane told me last week Clara's getting everything. Said Eleanor's too practical for the future." My mother's name on her lips, paired with that casual betrayal, hit like a second blow. Had she been planning this all along? I didn't flinch, though my chest ached as if the accident had cracked it open again. My mother's silence was louder than my father's words, her refusal to meet my eyes a confession of complicity. Clara stepped forward, her voice syrupy. As she said, "Eleanor, you've done so much, but it's time for new ideas." Her words were a mask, hiding something sharper, and I saw it in the way her fingers twitched, as if holding back a secret. The second twist came when I noticed a folded paper slip from my mother's purse as she adjusted it, landing near my feet. I knelt to pick it up, my hand steady despite the tremor in my heart. It was a receipt, dated the day of my accident, for a dinner with Clara and a lawyer. The realization was a quiet explosion. They'd been plotting while I was in the hospital, their signatures on the deed sealing my exclusion. I tucked the receipt into my pocket, my face a mask of calm, but inside, my mind raced, piecing together the threads. The locket, the photo, the receipt, the envelope, they were fragments of a truth I'd been too loyal to see. I stood, my gaze locking on my father, then Clara, then my mother, each a piece of the puzzle that had nearly cost me everything. The crowd's whispers grew, phones already out, capturing the tension as if sensing the storm to come. I didn't shout or cry, I let the silence speak, my eyes burning with a promise I hadn't yet voiced. They thought they'd buried me, but they'd only planted the seeds of their undoing. The locket pressed against my chest, a reminder of the heart I'd given this family, now a weapon I'd wield. I asked myself, and the crowd seemed to echo it, what would you do if your family betrayed you like this? The question hung, a challenge. To Loomis and to me, as I stepped back into the shadows, already planning my next move. The mill was my life, and I'd fight for it, not with tears, but with the cold, sharp edge of truth. The Harper house creaked under the weight of its secrets. Its walls lined with faded photographs and bolts of fabric that carried the musty scent of my childhood. I stood in the attic, dust motes swirling in the dim light filtering through a cracked window, my fingers tracing the edges of a brass locket I'd found buried in a box of Clara's old sketches. The locket, engraved with, "For the Heart of Harper Textiles," was a gift I'd given my father years ago, a symbol of my devotion to the mill that defined our family. He'd promised to cherish it, but here it was, discarded like my efforts, tangled with Clara's whimsical drawings. And a faded photograph of my father with a woman I didn't recognize, her face half obscured by shadow. The sting of his words at Founder's Day, "She's better than you, Eleanor," echoed in my chest, a wound that hadn't healed since I left the hospital. I'd given up college, my dreams, my savings, all to keep the mill running while my sister chased her art school fantasies. Yet my mother had called my work practical, her praise reserved for Clara's genius. Was I ever part of their vision, or just a tool they no longer needed? I sat on the attic floor, the locket heavy in my palm, its cold metal a reminder of the family I thought I knew. My mother's face flashed in my mind, her tight smile at the festival as she clutched that yellowed envelope, its contents a mystery. That nod at me. The receipt I'd found in her purse, dated the day of my accident, burned in my pocket, a dinner with Clara and a lawyer while I lay in the ICU. My fingers brushed the photograph again, the woman's eyes hauntingly familiar. Though I couldn't place her. A memory surfaced, sharp and unbidden. Years ago, I'd pushed to modernize the mill, to streamline its aging machines, but my father had snapped, "You're too cautious, Eleanor. You'll ruin us." I'd backed down, thinking it was for the family, but now I wondered if that was when they began to push me out. In the hospital, half lost in painkiller haze, I'd overheard my mother whisper to Clara, "You're our legacy, sweetheart." The words had slipped past me then, but now they cut, a blade slicing through years of loyalty. I clutched the locket tighter, my mind racing. If I wasn't their daughter in their eyes, what was I to them? The attic stairs groaned as my mother's footsteps approached, her voice calling up, "Eleanor, what are you doing up there?" Her tone was soft, almost kind, but it carried the weight of expectation, as if my presence in her space was an intrusion. I slipped the locket and photograph into my pocket, my face a mask of calm as I descended. In the kitchen, she stood by the counter, her hands busy with a dishcloth, her eyes avoiding mine. "You shouldn't dig through old things," she said, her voice laced with a warning I hadn't noticed before. I nodded, but my gaze caught on a stack of papers on the table, half covered by a napkin. The top sheet bore Clara's handwriting. A list of gallery expenses, but beneath it was something older, a letter in my mother's hand, its ink faded but legible. I didn't touch it, not yet, but my heart quickened. "Just looking for some fabric," I lied, my voice steady despite the storm inside. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, and I saw it then. The woman who raised me was guarding something she thought I'd never find. The first twist hit as I stepped outside, the letter's opening line burned into my mind, "Thomas, we need to talk about Eleanor's place in the family." Was my mother questioning my role, or something deeper? I walked to the mill, its looming silhouette a constant in Loomis's skyline, its brick walls weathered but unyielding, much like me. The workers nodded as I passed, their eyes heavy with unspoken pity, as if they knew something I didn't. One of them, Mrs. Callahan, the neighbor who'd whispered at Founder's Day, caught me by the arm. "Eleanor," she said, her voice low, "your mother mentioned something odd last month, about Clara being the only one to carry the Harper name forward." Her words landed like a second betrayal, the implication clear, my family had been planning my erasure long before the festival. I thanked her, my smile tight, and moved on, but my mind churned. The photograph, the locket, the letter, they were pieces of a puzzle I'd been too loyal to see. Then came the second twist. In the mill's office, I found a locked drawer. Its key missing, but a faint scratch mark suggested it had been opened recently. Inside, I glimpsed a folder labeled Clara's Future, its edges worn, as if handled often. My father's handwriting was unmistakable, but a single line stood out. "Eleanor's accident was unfortunate, but timely." My breath caught. The words a cold confirmation of their intent. Had they wanted me out of the way, I didn't cry or rage, I catalogued every detail: the locket, the photograph, the receipt, the letter, the folder, was a thread in a tapestry of betrayal I was only beginning to unravel. My sister's voice echoed in my mind, her sugary offer of a clerk job at her gallery a mockery of my years at the mill. My father's dismissal, my mother's silence, Clara's smug triumph, they thought they'd written me out of the story. But I was watching now, my eyes sharp, my heart cold. I touched the locket in my pocket, its engraving a promise I'd made to this family, now a weapon I'd turn against them. The mill's hum surrounded me, its rhythm steady, like my resolve. I thought of the photograph, the woman's face, and the letter's cryptic line about my place. If I wasn't their daughter, who was I? The question burned, but it didn't break me. Instead, it sharpened my focus, each clue a step toward the truth. I asked myself, and the empty mill seemed to echo it, what would you do when your family turns their back on you? The answer was forming, not in tears or shouts, but in the quiet, deliberate steps I'd take to reclaim what was mine. The mill's office smelled of old paper and machine oil, a familiar refuge where I'd spent countless nights balancing the books that kept Harper Textiles alive. My fingers, still stiff from the accident, traced the worn edges of a ledger as I sat at the desk, the hum of the mill outside a steady pulse against the chaos in my mind. The locket hung heavy around my neck, its engraving a silent rebuke to the family that had cast me aside. My father's dismissal at Founder's Day lingered, not in his exact words but in the cold weight of them, a public erasure I couldn't unhear. The receipt from my mother's purse, proof of a dinner with Clara and a lawyer while I lay in the ICU, burned in my pocket, next to the faded photograph of my father with a woman whose face I couldn't place. The letter I'd glimpsed in the kitchen, hinting at my uncertain place in the family, gnawed at me. I needed answers, and the mill, with its secrets locked in drawers and ledgers, was where I'd find them. I pried open a locked drawer with a hairpin, my hand steady despite the tremor in my chest. Inside lay the deed to Harper Textiles, its parchment creased but official, bearing the signatures of my father, my mother, and Clara, dated the day my car spun off Route 19. My breath caught, the betrayal as sharp as the glass that had cut me. In the crash, I'd been rushing to a supplier meeting my father insisted I handle alone, a detail that now felt like a trap. The deed wasn't just a transfer of power, it was the mill itself, the heart of Loomis, the legacy I'd poured my life into while Clara chased her art gallery dreams. My sacrifice, college, savings, years of late nights, meant nothing to them. I rifled through the drawer, my fingers brushing a stack of papers bound with a rubber band. It was a loan agreement, the numbers staggering, with Clara's name scrawled across it. She'd borrowed heavily against the mill to fund her Philadelphia gallery, my name nowhere in sight despite my years keeping us solvent. The first twist hit like a blow. They'd used the mill, my mill, as collateral for her ambitions, cutting me out entirely. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, my mind racing to piece together their plan. Why erase me so completely? Then I saw it, tucked beneath the loan papers, a folded note in Clara's tight, looping handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, the words a confession that stopped my heart: make sure Eleanor's out of the way. The Route 19 meeting should do it. The second twist was a gut punch. She hadn't just benefited from my absence, she'd orchestrated it, pushing me toward that dangerous road knowing its risks. The memory of that day flooded back, Clara's insistence that I handle the meeting, her casual mention of Route 19's shortcut, her smile as I left. Had she planned for the deer, the crash, the ICU? My vision blurred, not with tears but with a cold clarity that settled over me like frost. I slipped the note into my pocket, next to the receipt and photograph, each piece a weapon I'd yet to wield. That evening, the Harper house was quiet, the kind of silence that hides a storm. My mother was in the dining room, arranging flowers for a dinner Clara had planned to celebrate her gallery's opening. My sister stood by the window, her silk scarf catching the lamplight, her voice bright as she described her vision to my mother. I entered, the deed and loan papers tucked in a folder under my arm, the locket a steady weight against my chest. What about the mill? I asked, my voice calm but sharp, cutting through their chatter. My father, sitting at the table, looked up, his eyes narrowing. You're not cut out for it, Eleanor, he said, his tone final, as if I were a ledger entry to be crossed out. My mother's hands froze on the flowers, her gaze flickering to Clara, who offered a pitying smile. Eleanor, you've done so much, Clara said, her voice dripping with false warmth, but it's time for something new. I set the folder on the table, the deed visible, and watched their faces shift, my father's jaw tightening, my mother's eyes widening. Then I placed the photograph from the attic next to it, my face cut from its frame, a silent accusation. This is how you see me? I asked, my voice low, the room so still I could hear their breaths catch. The moment was electric, a spark that could ignite Loomis's gossip. phones already poised to capture the tension. My mother reached for the photograph, her fingers trembling, but I didn't let her speak. You signed the deed while I was fighting for my life, I said, my eyes locked on hers. And Clara, you made sure I was on that road. Her smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of fear, but she recovered quickly, laughing it off. You're being dramatic, Eleanor. My father stood, his voice cold. This isn't the time. But it was. The workers outside, lingering after their shift, overheard the raised voices, their whispers spreading like wildfire, a moment ripe for sharing. I didn't shout or cry, I let the evidence speak, my silence louder than their denials. The locket pressed against my skin, a reminder of the heart I'd given this family, now a symbol of my resolve. I thought of the woman in the photograph, the letters hint about my place, and Clara's note. Was I their daughter, or just a pawn they'd sacrificed? The question burned, but I didn't falter. What would you do if your family saw you as disposable? I turned and left, the folder in hand, knowing this was only the beginning. The air in the Harper house was thick with unspoken accusations, each creak of the floorboards a reminder of the secrets buried within its walls. I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers tracing the locket around my neck, its engraved promise, for the heart of Harper Textiles, now a bitter irony. Clara's note, tucked safely in my pocket alongside the receipt and the photograph of my father with that unknown woman, burned against my skin. Her words, admitting she'd pushed me toward the dangerous Route 19, and the deed signatures, dated while I lay in the ICU, were proof of a betrayal I couldn't unsee. My mother's guarded glances and my father's cold dismissal at the mill had shifted something in me, not to despair, but to a sharp, unyielding focus. The mill was my life's work, and they'd tried to erase me from it. I wasn't their pawn anymore, I was their reckoning. But the weight of their actions pressed harder, each day a calculated effort to make me feel invisible. How much deeper did their deception run? My mother's notes began appearing on my desk at the mill, scribbled in her neat cursive, urging me to support Clara's vision for the future. Each one was a quiet jab, implying my years of keeping the mill solvent were merely a stepping stone for my sister's dreams. Clara called one evening, her voice dripping with condescension, offering me a clerk position at her Philadelphia gallery. It's a fresh start, Eleanor, she said, as if I were a charity case, not the one who'd balanced the books that funded her art school. I hung up, my silence louder than any retort, my mind cataloging her every word. My father, meanwhile, avoided me, his evenings spent sorting mill records in his study, muttering about new directions that never included me. I caught him once, slipping a folder into a locked cabinet, his eyes darting to ensure I hadn't seen. But I had. The workers at the mill, once my allies, now whispered about layoffs, their glances heavy with blame they thought I deserved. You lost the deed, one said, his voice low but cutting, unaware of the truth I carried in my pocket. The pressure was suffocating, a deliberate campaign to push me out, but it only sharpened my resolve. I began watching their routines, noting the moments they let their guard down. My mother's study, with its locked filing cabinet, became my focus. One night, while she was at a church meeting, I slipped inside, the key I'd found hidden in a vase cold in my hand. The cabinet opened with a soft click, revealing a stack of papers that smelled of dust and secrets. Among them was a ledger page, torn and crumpled, as if discarded in haste. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. Eleanor stopped my modernization plan. She's holding us back. The first twist hit like a slap. My refusal to modernize the mill years ago wasn't just a disagreement, it was a grudge he'd nursed, a reason to punish me by giving Clara everything. My heart raced, not with pain but with clarity. He hadn't just favored my sister, he'd rewritten our family story to make me the villain. I tucked the page away, my fingers steady, but another paper caught my eye, a half-burned letter. In my mother's hand, its edges charred as if she'd tried to destroy it. Clara knows about my mistake, it read, and she's using it. The second twist was a jolt. Clara was leveraging a secret, my mother's affair, to ensure her compliance. My mother wasn't just complicit, she was trapped. I left the study, the papers hidden in my coat, my mind piecing together their web. The next morning, I found a family portrait on the dining room table, one I'd framed years ago, its glass cracked and my face scratched out, leaving only Clara's smile beside our parents. My breath caught, the image a silent declaration of my erasure. I carried it to the mill, where Clara was meeting with a supplier, her laughter echoing through the office. My father stood nearby, nodding approvingly, while my mother arranged files, her eyes avoiding mine. I set the portrait on the desk, its damaged frame glinting in the light. "This is how you see me?" I asked, my voice low but sharp, cutting through their chatter. The room froze, Clara's laughter dying, my father's jaw tightening. My mother reached for the portrait, her hands trembling, but I held her gaze. You used the mill to fund Clara's gallery, I said, and you blame me for your failures. The workers outside, pausing their tasks, overheard, their whispers spreading like sparks, a moment ripe for Loomis's gossip mills. Phones were out, capturing the cracked portrait, a viral image of betrayal that would ripple through the town. Clara recovered first, her smile tight. You're imagining things, Eleanor, she said, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. My father stepped forward, his voice cold. You're causing trouble we don't need. My mother said nothing, her silence a confession of its own. I didn't shout or cry, I let the portrait speak, its defaced image louder than their denials. The locket pressed against my chest, a reminder of the heart I'd given this family. Now a symbol of my fight. I thought of the charred letter, Clara's hold over my mother, and my father's grudge. They thought they could bury me in their lies, but I was digging deeper, each clue a step toward dismantling their facade. The mill's hum surrounded me as I left, its rhythm steady, like my pulse. Was I the obstacle they needed gone, or the truth they couldn't face? The question lingered, but I had my answer. I'd fight, not with tears, but with the cold precision of someone who'd seen their game. What would you do if your family tried to erase you? The mill's basement was a labyrinth of shadows, its air heavy with the scent of rust and forgotten fabric. I descended the creaking stairs, a flashlight in one hand, the locket around my neck a steady weight against my chest. Clara's note, the deed, the receipt, the charred letter, and the defaced portrait were tucked in my coat, each a piece of the betrayal that had unraveled my family. My mother's complicity, bound by Clara's knowledge of her affair, and my father's grudge against me for blocking his plans years ago had turned my world into a chessboard where I was no longer a player. The confrontation at the mill office had lit a spark in Loomis, the cracked portrait a viral image now whispered about in diners and church pews. But I needed more than whispers, I needed proof that would break their facade. The basement, with its dusty crates and forgotten records, was where the mill's secrets lived, and I was done being the daughter who looked away. I pried open a crate, its wood splintering under my hands, revealing a ledger bound in cracked leather. My father's handwriting filled its pages, each line a confession of theft, years of mill profits funneled to Clara's gallery, disguised as consulting fees. The final entry, dated just before my accident, showed a massive withdrawal, signed by my mother. The first shock hit hard. They hadn't just signed the deed while I was in the ICU, they'd been bleeding the mill dry for Clara's ambitions. My years of sacrifice reduced to nothing. My fingers trembled as I traced the numbers, my mind racing back to a meeting years ago when I'd argued against selling part of the mill's land to developers. My father had called me stubborn, his voice sharp with frustration, but now I saw it. My refusal wasn't just a disagreement, it was the reason he'd turned against me. The second shock was a quiet gut punch, a scrawled note in the ledgers. Margin, in his hand, Eleanor's caution cost us millions. Clara will fix it. He wasn't just favoring my sister. He was punishing me for protecting the mill's heart. I sat back on the cold floor, the ledger open in my lap, the locket pressing against my skin. The photograph of my father with that unknown woman flickered in my mind, her face a mystery tied to my mother's cryptic letter about my place in the family. I'd thought loyalty bound us, but it was a lie, one I'd believed too long. Footsteps echoed above, and I stilled, recognizing Clara's sharp heels on the mill's floor. She was meeting a supplier, her voice carrying through the vents, bright and confident as she spoke of her gallery's success. I slipped the ledger into my coat, my movements silent, and climbed the stairs to the boardroom, where my father and mother were waiting for her. The air was thick with their unspoken alliance, their eyes avoiding mine as I entered, the ledger hidden but heavy in my hands. I didn't wait for their pleasantries. You stole from the mill, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. My father's face reddened, but Clara smirked, her confidence unshaken. You missed the real plan, she said, sliding a contract across the table. The contract was a bombshell, signed while I was in the hospital, selling half the mill's land to developers for condos that would erase Loomis's history. My mother's hands shook as she reached for her coffee, her silence louder than Clara's smugness. Then came the third shock. Clara leaned forward, her voice low. I made sure you were on Route 19 that day, she said, her eyes glinting with malice. You were too much of a liability. My mother gasped, her cup clattering, her face betraying she hadn't known the full extent of Clara's scheme. The admission was a knife, confirming what her note had hinted. My sister hadn't just benefited from my accident, she'd planned it. I held up the ledger, its pages open to the damning entries. This will bury you, I said, my voice steel, my eyes locked on Clara's. The workers outside, drawn by the raised voices, pressed closer, their phones capturing the moment, a confrontation that would spread through Loomis like wildfire. A viral spark of truth against their lies. My father stood, his voice booming. You're out of line, Eleanor. But I didn't flinch, my gaze shifting to my mother, who looked away, her hands twisting in her lap. The locket burned against my chest, a reminder of the heart I'd given this family, now a weapon in my fight. I thought of the photograph, the woman's face, and the ledger's note about my caution. They'd rewritten me as the obstacle, but I was rewriting their story. The boardroom's tension was electric, the workers' murmurs a chorus of outrage, their recordings a promise that this moment would echo beyond the mill. I didn't shout or cry, I let the ledger speak, its numbers louder than their denials. As I turned to leave, I asked myself, and the room seemed to hold its breath, did I underestimate Clara's cruelty, or was I always meant to fight her? The question hung, a challenge to the family that had tried to erase me, and to the town that was beginning to see the truth. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the cracked vinyl booths where Loomis's secrets were traded over coffee and pie. I sat across from Mr. Grayson, the mill's old accountant, his hands trembling as he clutched a folder of faded papers. The locket hung heavy around my neck, its engraved promise a bitter reminder of the family that had betrayed me. The ledger from the basement, Clara's note admitting she'd orchestrated my accident, and the contract selling the mill's land were tucked in my bag, each a weapon in the war I was waging. My father's grudge, Clara's manipulation of my mother's secret affair, and the defaced portrait had turned my pain into a cold, sharp resolve. The boardroom confrontation had set Loomis alight, the image of that cracked portrait spreading like wildfire. But I needed allies, and Mr. Grayson, with his quiet guilt and insider knowledge, was my first move. The diner's hum felt like the mill's pulse, steadying me as I prepared to cut deeper into their lies. Mr. Grayson's eyes darted to the door, as if expecting my father to walk in. I kept copies, he whispered, sliding the folder across the table. Inside were duplicates of every transaction, including the ones my father had hidden, mill funds siphoned to Clara's gallery, disguised as expenses. The first revelation hit like a shockwave. He'd certified forged loan documents under my father's pressure, tying the mill to Clara's debts, but kept clean copies as a silent act of atonement. His shift from complicity to ally was a lifeline, his guilt a crack in their armor. I didn't know about Route 19, he said, his voice breaking, referencing Clara's plot to put me in harm's way. I nodded, my face calm, but inside, my mind catalogued his words, each one a thread in the tapestry I was weaving. The second revelation was sharper. Clara's gallery was collateral for the loan, her dreams tethered to the mill's fate. If the mill fell, so would she. Her ambition wasn't just greed, it was a gamble that could destroy everything. I left the diner, the folder under my arm, and headed to the town hall, where Mr. Tate, a councilman who owed me a favor from years of balancing his campaign's books, waited. The hall's oak-paneled walls echoed with Loomis's history, a stark contrast to the betrayal I carried. I slid the folder to Mr. Tate, its contents heavy with proof, the ledger, the contract, the deed's timestamp. This could ruin the Harpers, I said, my voice steady. He scanned the pages, his jaw tightening at the developer deal that would turn the mill's land into condos. I'll move to freeze the sale, he promised, his eyes meeting mine with a rare sincerity. The weight of his support grounded me, but I wasn't done. That evening, at a town council meeting, I stood before a packed room, the ledger open in my hands. The Harpers built Loomis, I said, but they're selling its heart for profit. I detailed the siphoned funds, the forged loan, the land deal signed while I fought for my life. The crowd gasped, their phones already out. Capturing the moment, a viral spark that would burn through the town's gossip networks. My father rose, his face flushed with fury. You're twisting the truth, Eleanor, he bellowed, but the room's mood had shifted, eyes narrowing at him. Clara, standing beside him, tried to interject, her voice smooth. The mill needs new life, she said, but her words fell flat, her confidence cracking under the crowd's scrutiny. My mother sat silent, her hands clasped, her face pale as if seeing Clara's ruthlessness for the first time. The third revelation came as I held up the contract, its signatures stark against the page. Clara knew about the land sale, I said, my eyes locking on my sister's. She used our mother's past to force her silence. The room erupted in murmurs, the crowd stunned by the depth of Clara's manipulation, her use of my mother's affair to secure her power. My mother's head bowed, her silence a confession, and I saw it then, Clara's hold over her wasn't just leverage, it was a calculated betrayal that had trapped her as much as me. The council voted to halt the sale, Mr. Tate's influence tipping the scales. The workers outside, their phones still recording, cheered, their voices a chorus of defiance that echoed through Loomis. The moment was electric, a shared outrage that would spread beyond the hall, a call to protect the mill's legacy. I didn't shout or gloat, I let the evidence speak, my silence louder than their protests. The locket pressed against my chest, its weight a reminder of the heart I'd given this family, now a symbol of my fight to reclaim what was mine. I thought of the photograph, the unknown woman, and the secrets still buried. Was I fighting for a family that never saw me as theirs? The question burned, but my resolve was unbreakable. As I left the hall, the crowd's murmurs followed me. Their recordings a promise that the truth was no longer theirs to control. The Harper house felt like a mausoleum, its silence heavy with the ghosts of my family's betrayal. I stood in my mother's study, the locket around my neck a cold reminder of the heart I'd poured into the mill, now a weapon in my fight. The ledger, Clara's damning note, the contract for the land sale, and the photograph of my father with an unknown woman were tucked in my bag, each a shard of the truth I'd uncovered. The town hall victory, with Mr. Tate freezing the sale and Mr. Grayson's evidence exposing the mill's siphoned funds, had shifted Loomis's tide, the workers' cheers a viral echo spreading through the town. But the fight wasn't over. Clara's manipulation of my mother's past and my father's grudge for my past defiance were only part of the story. I needed to know why they'd erased me, why my place in the family felt like a lie I'd been too loyal to question. The study's locked drawer, where my mother kept her secrets, was my next target. I waited until my mother left for a charity lunch, her absence a rare window. The drawer opened with a hairpin, revealing a leather-bound journal, its pages worn but filled with her meticulous handwriting. One entry, dated years ago, stopped my heart. Thomas calls Eleanor the workhorse, Clara the face. I fear Eleanor isn't his, but we can't let it out. The first shock was a blade through my chest. My mother suspected I wasn't my father's daughter, a secret that explained their coldness, their willingness to cast me aside. My hands shook as I turned the pages, finding another entry. Clara knows about my mistake. She's using it to secure her future. The pieces fell into place. Clara's hold over my mother wasn't just about the affair, it was a weapon to ensure I was erased. I tucked the journal away, my mind reeling, but another paper slipped from the drawer, a loan document with my signature, forged in my mother's hand, tying me to Clara's gallery debts. The second shock hit harder. My mother hadn't just stood by, she'd actively bound me to their scheme, making me a scapegoat for their financial ruin. I moved to the mill, where the workers' trust in me was growing, their whispers now of support rather than blame. Mr. Grayson met me in the office, his eyes heavy with guilt but steady with resolve. I should have spoken sooner, he said, handing me a duplicate of the forged loan document. Your mother signed it while you were in the hospital. The third shock was a quiet explosion. Mr. Grayson's shift from complicity to ally wasn't just a confession, it was proof my mother had woven me into their betrayal, using my name to protect Clara. His willingness to help was a crack in their armor, one I'd widen. I rallied the workers at a union meeting, holding the forged document and the defaced portrait from the Harper house. This family built Loomis, I said, my voice steady, but they've torn it apart. I detailed the forged signature, the siphoned funds, and Clara's manipulation of my mother's secret. The workers gasped, their phones capturing the moment, a viral spark that would burn through Loomis's gossip networks. Clara arrived, uninvited, her silk scarf catching the light as she stepped into the meeting. You're tearing us apart, Eleanor, she said, her voice smooth but edged with panic. My mother followed, her face pale, her hands twisting. My father stood at the back, his silence a heavy presence. I held up the journal, its pages open. To the damning entry. You doubted I was part of this family, I said, my eyes on my mother, and you used me to cover your lies. Her gasp was audible, her eyes darting to Clara, who froze, her control slipping. The crowd's outrage was electric, their murmurs a chorus of betrayal, phones recording as Clara stammered, you're twisting it. But the journal and the forged document spoke louder, their truth undeniable. My mother's face crumpled, revealing she hadn't known Clara had used her affair to force her hand, a betrayal within a betrayal that left her exposed. I didn't shout or cry, I let the evidence speak, my silence a blade sharper than their denials. The locket pressed against my chest, its weight grounding me as I thought of the photograph, the unknown woman, and the journal's hint about my origins. If I wasn't their daughter, why did I still fight for the mill? The workers' cheers followed me as I left, their recordings a promise that this moment would echo beyond the meeting. Mr. Grayson's nod was a quiet vow, Mr. Tate's counsel vote a foundation for justice. I asked myself, and the room seemed to echo it, if your family rewrote your place in their story, would you fight to reclaim it or walk away? The question lingered, but my steps were sure, each one a move toward dismantling their lies. The mill's office was a fortress of memory, its walls lined with faded invoices and photographs of better days, the hum of the looms a steady heartbeat. Beneath my feet, I stood at the desk, the locket around my neck a cold anchor, its engraving a silent vow to the legacy I'd fought for. My bag held the ledger, Clara's note confessing her role in my accident, the forged loan document, and my mother's journal, its pages revealing her doubt about my parentage and her complicity in tying me to Clara's debts. The town hall's vote to halt the land sale, backed by Mr. Tate and fueled by Mr. Grayson's evidence, had turned Loomis's tide. the workers support a growing fire. But the journal's hint, that I might not be my father's daughter, burned deeper than Clara's schemes or my mother's betrayal. I needed to know the truth, not just to save the mill, but to understand why I'd been cast aside. The photograph of my father with that unknown woman haunted me, her face a puzzle piece I couldn't place. I moved to the attic of the Harper house, where dust clung to every surface, the air thick with the scent of old fabric and secrets. My mother was at a church meeting, my father at the mill, and Clara in Philadelphia, leaving the house eerily still. I sifted through a trunk, its contents a jumble of my childhood, letters, sketches, and a small velvet box. Inside was a silver ring, engraved with initials I didn't recognize, E.L. My breath caught, the first shock hitting like a spark. The initials weren't mine, nor my mother's, but they matched the faded photograph's mystery woman. Was she tied to the journal's doubt about my origins? I tucked the ring into my pocket, my fingers brushing the locket, and found a letter tucked beneath a quilt, its paper yellowed but intact. My mother's handwriting was unmistakable. Thomas, we can't tell Eleanor about her mother. Clara's future depends on her loyalty. The second shock was a blade. My mother hadn't just doubted my place, she'd hidden the truth of my birth to protect Clara's claim. I wasn't their daughter, not fully, and they'd used my devotion to keep me in line. I drove to the mill, the ring and letter in my pocket, my mind sharp despite the ache in my chest. Meester Gresham met me in the office, his face lined with the weight of his past silence. There's more, he said, handing me a recording device, its weight small but heavy with promise. I taped a meeting last week. Your father didn't know. I played it, his voice crackling through the static, offering a council member a bribe to push the land sale through despite the freeze. Clara's the future, he said, and Eleanor's out of the picture. The third shock was a quiet explosion. My father knew I wasn't his, yet he'd exploited my loyalty to keep the mill running while planning to hand it to Clara. The recording was a weapon, one that could shatter their facade, but it also confirmed the photograph's shadow. The woman who might be my mother was a secret he'd buried to control me. I called a community meeting at the mill, the workers gathering in the warehouse, their faces a mix of hope and anger. Mr. Tate stood by me, his council authority lending weight to my words. I held up the ring, its initials glinting under the lights. This isn't about family, I said, my voice steady, it's about truth. I played the recording, my father's voice echoing through the crowd, each word a nail in their betrayal. Gasps rippled through the room, phones capturing the moment, a viral spark that would blaze through Loomis. Clara, summoned by a worker's call, arrived mid-speech, her face paling as the recording looped. You're lying, she spat, but the crowd's murmurs drowned her, their outrage a tide turning against her. My mother, standing at the edge, clutched her purse, her eyes wide with panic. I held up the letter, its words stark. You hid who I am, I said, my gaze locking on hers, to keep me under your thumb. Her silence was a confession, the room's tension electric as workers whispered, their recordings a promise of justice. My father stormed forward, his voice booming. You've gone too far, Eleanor. But I didn't flinch, the locket grounding me as I faced him. You used me, knowing I wasn't yours, I said, the ring in my hand a silent accusation. The crowd's shock was palpable, their phones still rolling, capturing a moment that would echo beyond the mill. I didn't shout or cry, I let the evidence speak, my silence louder than their denials. The photograph's mystery woman, the rings, initials, and the recording wove a truth I was only beginning to grasp. Was I fighting for a family that never claimed me, or for the mill that was my true home? The question hung, a challenge to Loomis and to myself, as I stepped back, the workers' cheers a chorus of defiance, the mill's silhouette stood stark against the Loomis dawn, its brick walls weathered but unyielding, much like me. I sat in the office, the locket around my neck a quiet testament to the heart I'd given this place, now a symbol of my triumph. My bag held the evidence that had unraveled my family's lies, Clara's note confessing her role in my accident, the ledger exposing stolen funds, the forged loan document, my mother's journal questioning my parentage, and the ring with initials tying me to a stranger's face in an old photograph. The town hall's vote, Mr. Tate's support, and Mr. Grayson's shift to ally had turned Loomis's tide, the workers' cheers a fire that burned through their deception. The recording of my father's bribe had sealed their fate, but the truth about my origins, confirmed by my mother's words and my father's exploitation, cut deeper. I wasn't their daughter, yet I'd been their pawn. Today, I'd end it, not with tears, but with a truth that would reshape Loomis's story. I met Mr. Tate at the courthouse, where the workers and townsfolk gathered, their faces a mix of hope and outrage. Mr. Grayson stood by me, his hand steady as he handed me a final piece of evidence, a second recording, one he'd kept hidden. I played it in the packed room, my father's voice crackling through the silence, admitting he knew I wasn't his daughter but kept me close to secure the mill's future, while funneling its wealth to Clara. The first shock was a thunderbolt. He'd exploited my loyalty, knowing I wasn't his, to protect his legacy for my sister. Gasps rippled through the crowd, their phones capturing the moment, a viral spark that would blaze beyond Loomis. Clara, standing at the back, tried to interrupt, her voice sharp. "You're ruining everything, Eleanor," she said, but her words faltered under the crowd's glare. My mother's face crumpled, her silence a confession of her complicity in hiding my true mother's identity. Then came the second shock, buried in the recording's final moments, my father's voice, low and bitter, mentioning Ellen Langston. The woman in the photograph, my real mother, whose existence he'd erased to keep me tethered to his plans. The initials on the ring, EL, were hers, a link to a truth they'd buried. I held up the photograph, its faded edges trembling in my hand. "This is who I came from," I said, my voice steady, "and you hid her to control me." The crowd's outrage was electric, their recordings a promise that this moment would echo far beyond the courthouse. My father's face reddened, but he said nothing, his silence damning. My mother reached for Clara, but my sister pulled away, her control shattered. I didn't shout or cry, I let the evidence speak, my silence louder than their denials. The judge, swayed by the recordings and Mr. Tate's motion, ruled to restore the mill's deed to the workers' cooperative, with me as overseer, a victory. That felt like reclaiming my soul. The workers cheered, their voices a chorus of justice, their phones still rolling, capturing a moment that would inspire Loomis to rebuild. I stepped outside, the locket warm against my skin, the photograph and ring in my pocket a bridge to a past I'd only begun to uncover. I thought of Ellen Langston, a woman I'd never know, and the family that had used me as a tool. The mill was safe, but my fight had been for more than brick and mortar, it was for the truth of who I was. I stood on the courthouse steps, the town's eyes on me, and asked myself, when your family builds a legacy on your erasure, do you reclaim it or redefine it? The answer was clear in the workers' cheers, in the mill's steady hum, in the weight of the locket I'd never remove. Looking back, I see the attic where I found the locket, the basement ledger, the journal's cruel words, and the ring that gave me a name, Ellen Langston. Each step was a wound, but also a weapon, forged in the fire of their betrayal. I learned a truth colder than their lies: family isn't blood or promises, it's the people who choose you when you're broken. The workers, Mr. Grayson, Mr. Tate, they became my family when the Harpers cast me out. To those who've been pushed aside, unseen in their own homes, know this: your worth isn't their verdict. You build your place with every quiet stand, every truth you claim. I'm not the daughter they wanted, but I'm the woman who saved the mill, who found herself in its shadows. If you're fighting a family that doesn't see you, hold fast, your truth is your power. Subscribe to our channel to join the next story of those who rise from betrayal, because your fight matters.